So I've had a few requests for this topic, as well as the odd Patreon question here and there, so I thought why not do a little video on it. Now what with all the interest in the Spectrum these days thanks to various Kickstarters, the Spectrum Next, geez even the wretched and doomed Vega Plus in its own special way, interest in Spectrum games is a little higher than usual, and not just for the classics. More and more games that are actually released for the system now are getting attention. And so, I thought I'd give a few of them some time in the sun here, just as kind of a little overview skimming the surface of what you can find on the Specky in 2017. So let's have a little look. Now first, some background. The commercial history of the ZX Spectrum ended around about 1993. That was when the last commercial published release for the system came out, Nigel Mansell's World Championship, I believe. However, the system has never fully died. The Spectrum Homebrew scene has always been one of the very strongest out there. We're not just talking about 1 or 2 new games a year, we're talking multiple games every month. There's still lots of people out there doing things in the old-fashioned way, creating a game by themselves on the Specky, in their bedroom, or their office, or wherever. Probably doesn't have to actually be a bedroom, but you know what I mean. If anything, creating games on the Specky is far easier now than it was then. Not just because of the internet and all the communication that it brings, but because of tools that are out there such as Arcade Game Designer by Jonathan Caldwell, which is about as close as you can get to having a version of Game Maker on the Spectrum. Combine this with other useful tools from back in the day such as Quill for text adventures, or COL's 3D Game Maker that's geared towards isometric games, and you've got a lot of useful kit available. It's all free, easy to get into through emulation, and it can be picked up in a pretty quick amount of time. More than that, the scene is still full with vets who've been making games for a long while. The aforementioned Caldwell, Paul Jenkinson, Gabriello Amore, Andy Johns, just to name a few. So you get a fair amount of games, and they're usually of a pretty good standard. The Specky scene isn't just still living, it's in rude health, and always has been. So with that said, let's start getting into some games. Speccy Homebrew titles do fit into many interesting categories, but some common ones tend to be either takes on an old Specky classic, emulations of an already well-known game, or those strange games that fit in both categories. These 3 categories mostly represent the selection of 5 that I've got. This video isn't at all meant to be exhaustive, they're just some decent ones I've played recently and would like to recommend to you, and all bar one of them are from 2017. Let's kick things off with a fantastic game called Ooze. Ooze by Andy Johns is the sort of new Specky game that I love. I've got such a soft spot for Specky platformers in general, and honestly a majority of the new Specky games out there are platformers, so, yay for me. Something like Ooze shows how far programming on the system has come. Well over 30 years down the road, you get something like this which moves so fast with lots of animation, music and colour, but no colour clash or anything like that. And it's not like it's using any extra memory or anything either. We've certainly come a long way. The game itself has you play as this piece of ooze who has to collect 4 keys in order to turn off the multicoloured force fields, get out of this space, and return to his people. Being a blob of goo, he doesn't jump normally. Instead, he flips from the ceiling to the ground, and vice versa. Which, might sound familiar if you ever played the almighty VVVVVV. Immediately, this is a massive plus point. I've played VVVVVV to death, so the existence of another game that uses the flipping mechanic is most definitely welcome, especially when, like that game, it rocks up with excellent graphics and music. So if you ever wanted V6 on the Spectrum, Ooze is definitely the way to go. Honestly, on playing this, I can't find all that much wrong with it aside from it being quite short, especially on emulators. Using save states and the like, you can get it through in about 20 minutes. The game itself does have limited lives though, so if, unlike me, you have the discipline to not use save states, then this game should give you a much longer challenge, which is probably the ideal way to go. On the whole, it's a very good and totally free game, and as far as new Specky games go, I can't recommend it enough. Now, a quick look at a few new Specky games would not be complete without perhaps the most famous piece of Specky homebrew of the last couple of years, that being Castlevania Spectral Interlude, made by Rewind and released in 2015. A fantastic, exceptionally well realised Specky take on a classic that is as good as you would want a Vania game to be on the computer. Everything from fine platform action to some typically Specky-esque irreverent humour. Spectral Interlude plays somewhat with the usual Vania theme. Now in CV lore, Dracula comes back to life every 100 years to be killed by a member of the Belmont family. That's all good, but it actually means, if you think about it, that the odd Belmont family member is just going to be utterly useless and not get the chance to do any vampire killing at all. Such is the case with old Simon Belmont here. We're about 50 years away from the next resurrection, and as such, he has no purpose. But hey, if he can collect the various bits of Drac that are lying around, he could resurrect him, kill him, and then be worthy of the Belmont name. And so that's the plot. It's a bit of a piss take of Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, basically. As far as a free piece of software goes based on a classic title, I would be really struggling to say anything bad whatsoever about this. You've got classic Spectrum cocktail flip screen, but that doesn't mean the game doesn't play utterly like Castlevania. You've got fantastic AY chip renditions of classic Vania music, and the controls are absolutely spot on, along with the writing, the feel of it, and everything else. This is definitely a game that Vania fans will love, especially those who have a spot in their heart for the, let's be honest, often maligned Simon's Quest. This is how good the Speccy Homebrew scene is right here. You get games that aren't just comparable to the most advanced Speccy titles from back in its day, but they actually surpass them. Next up, we have Circuitry, another platformer. This is a game by Don Blythe, and unlike the previous two games, it's very much in the classic Speccy mould. The game's primary influence is undoubtedly Manic Miner, taking the single-screen level format as well as having to collect a bunch of items before hitting the exit. It is in many ways a game that you could envision playing on this system in around about 1984 or so, but the controls are perhaps that little bit faster and smoother than they would have been back then. Plus, I love the setting. There's just something to me, aesthetically, about a computer game that's based inside of a computer in the way that this one is. You're travelling around motherboards and chipsets and daughterboards and all that sort of thing, and there's a certain method to the madness and business that's going on. I think it's great. And like most of these games, there's plenty of challenging pinpoint jumps to take on. A very solid and traditional piece of Speccy fare that's not to be missed. If shooting's a bit more of your bag, how about Roboprobe? I really like this one. It's an adventure-style shooting game where you take your little robot around a maze-type area, collecting items and blasting enemies as much as you can. If you've ever played Hewson's classic Cybernoid, then this game is rather similar. It's not quite as good as Cybernoid, as the backgrounds can be that little bit samey, but gameplay-wise it's as solid as a rock. The sort of game that I would have absolutely loved to play on a cover tape back in the day. And lastly, here's Deep Blue, an isometric adventure game by Irazkin. This sort of game was the Speccy's party piece back in the day after games like Nightlaw and what have you, so seeing a homebrew one is pretty cool. This was made in CRL's 3D Game Maker, and there are limitations because of this, such as only getting one life. You might want to use save states on this one. However, people are working on the Game Maker tool to add lives, as well as menu systems and other things, and they've got a pretty good chance of succeeding. These last two games here are perhaps still works in progress, but they're both worth playing and pretty close to excellence, just a little bit more on them. So that's just a quick skim of the surface of what's available currently for the Speccy. Now I'm aware that some might look at this selection and think that, well, it's just a bunch of games that are all heavily influenced by already famous titles. V6, Castlevania, Manic Miner, Cybernoid and Nightlaw. But I really wanted to showcase the technical quality of these homebrew games, pound for pound that is. They surpass the best of original classic Speccy software, and it's amazing how far the system has been pushed over 35 years nearly. And rest assured that there's plenty more like this, and plenty more games that carry on the Speccy sense of weirdness to boot. It's a whole playground out there, and it's waiting for you to come in. The question then is, how do you keep up with all the Speccy scene goings on if you're interested in doing so? There's a couple of good ways, of course. You'll find a bunch of folk who do new Speccy stuff on YouTube. As with all things, you should watch Paul Jenkinson's Spectrum show every month. Along with talking about all the latest system goings on, he reviews at least one new game in every video, along with various classics, new hardware, all that good shit. Indie Retro News is a good source for hearing about brand new games, looking at reviews, and getting links to download or even buy in some cases. Some folks do still release this stuff on cassette tapes, don't you know? With the Spectrum Next coming soon, it's a really good time to get into Speccy Homebrew, as we could see lots more advances ahead. So keep an eye out on these places and wherever else you may find. I'll leave links to all of this and the games that I covered in the description below, so don't hesitate to check them out and get yourself into some of this year's best Speccy games. And hell, if you're already into the homebrew stuff and you have some other games that you'd like to recommend to people, don't hesitate to put all that stuff in the comments below too. So I shall leave it there, so hopefully you enjoyed this video. Do please like it if you like it, and follow me on all my social media. Again, all that's in the description below. Subscription, likes, all awesome. And yeah, that will do for this one, so bye for now. For this video I would like to thank the following: Adam Schaefer, Andrew Dalton, Andy Catt, Audie Sawley, Carly, Conformist, Daniel David Taylor, Dustin Cooper, Gary Pinkett, George Newton, Ghostly Spectre, Grafton Blackpool, James Idd, James Loveridge, Jason Durso, Jason Goy, Jason Leach, Jason Stevens, Johan Eriksson, Josh Jensen, Elo O'Brien, Lee Norris, ManagerSim.net, Mark Heslop, Mark Johnston, Mark Whittington, Martin Pataki, Nanette McCrone, Olaf Albeen, Pete Morris, Peter Jack, Peter Sidorn, Bill Taprog, Rachel Maxwell, Romeo, Ryan Wyatt Coleman, Sammy Lee, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Taylor Armand, Leon Natural, Tanya J, Twisted Squote, Bishar D, Yerka Operator, and Zach Roach.